All right, we'll call this meeting to order. This is Monday, May 18th. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic
for which stands
one nation, under God,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the roll, please.
Peter,
Here.
Ellery, Kinsfater,
Here.
Kufa,
Here.
Laporte,
here,
McCartney,
Here.
Watt,
Here.
I'll make a motion to excuse Ellery.
Support. All right, motion made, support to excuse member Ellery. Call the roll.
What if he joins us? What if he rejoins us? Can we postpone the
can we make
excuse until after the meeting?
Can we make the motion contingent that if he does join us, he'll be marked as in attendance?
Yes, his appearance can be noted when he arrives.
Okay.
all right,
All right, call the roll on that, please.
Kinsfater,
Yes.
Kufa,
Yes.
Laporte,
yes,
McCartney,
Yeah.
Watt,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Carrie Drowner.
All right, thank you. All right, tonight's meeting, if anybody out in the public has any questions or comments, call in. Our city clerk will screen those calls and bring those calls to us. Before we vote on anything, we'll allow the public some time for questions and comments. And obviously at number 12, public comments, questions and comments, we'll certainly take those at that time too. We'll give it an extra minute of wait time anytime we're going to vote because of the circumstances here with this remote meeting. We'll go to the consent agenda. A, City Council minutes of May 4th, 2020, regular meeting recommendation approved.
so moved here,
Support.
All right, motions made, supported, questions? Call the roll, please.
Kinsfater,
Yes.
Kufa,
Yes.
Laporte,
yes,
McCartney,
Yeah.
Watt,
Yes.
Cedar,
Yes.
Carrie Drowner.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll go to number 5, presentations. We have a very special presentation tonight. This is our 2020 proposed annual budget. Mr. Roth, this is our first budget with you, and we thought we'd give him some time to go through that with everybody, so it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm about to take over the screen and share the slide presentation that I've created. That's an overview of the proposed 2020-21 fiscal year budget. When I'm sharing my screen, I'm not going to be able to see you. So if in whatever reason there's an audio error on my end and you're not able to hear me or you lose me, please just call out and I can stop and then we can get that taken care of. So again, I'm going to be taking over the screens right now and you'll be able to view my presentation. All right, so budget year overview. So before we begin going in over the numbers, I want to talk about the charter requirements. The city charter requires the draft budget be delivered to council the first Monday of May, and it needs to be adopted by June 15th. Now, this is the typical schedule of municipalities with a July 1st fiscal year start. However, our fiscal year begins October 1st. This is very uncommon to adopt the budget 5 months ahead of time, and we might be the only city in the entire state that whose charter requires us to adopt the budget this early prior to that fiscal year start date. Again, you'll see a lot of news lately. Most cities fiscal year starts July 1. So in June and May, they're adopting their budget, which begins in July 1. Now, for us at the city of St. Clair, it kind of creates challenges and uncertainty in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, we're going to be seeing significant drops in planned revenue this year. However, that's for this year. That's not October 1. So there's a lag in between the effect that we see from these revenue decreases in our budget versus our peer communities whose fiscal year budgets are adopted much closer to the fiscal year start date. I just wanted to point that out, that it's something very unique about the city. And again, we might be the only city in the state that adopts their budget this early. All right, so this budget, there's two main revenue sources we get from the state that are going to be impacted by the decline in economic activity. One of those is revenue sharing payments, which is paid up to every local government from sales tax collections. And then the other one is Act 51 gas tax payments, which help pay for street improvements. And again, that's gas tax dollars, people traveling less, buying less gas. The state has less tax revenue to share with us. So this budget assumes that there's going to be a 10% reduction in the revenue sharing and a 5% reduction in Act 51 gas tax payments. Now, the immediate reductions are going to be much higher than that. But again, because we're 5 months out still, those reductions are going to affect this current fiscal year. And I am expecting the economy to have recovered somewhat in 5 months. So again, I'm still budgeting for reductions, but not as much as some of our other neighboring communities will be, because their budget starts July 1, ours starts October 1. Now that gas tax reduction could be higher to than 5% as well, because the state legislature is supposed to appropriate $600 million in increase in road funding this year. Obviously, if the state needs to balance its budget, that might be one of the first things that they cut. I wanted to point that out. I also budgeted declines in the harbor and golf course revenues to just reflect the uncertainty of the economic activity at those two services we offer. The recreation budget has been prepared as if all programming is allowed for the fiscal year. Obviously, our actual ability to provide programming beginning in fall is uncertain. Now, of course, the budget is a living document, and it can be amended as needed to reflect changing needs and circumstances throughout the fiscal year. So a summary of the budget right now: total revenues are roughly $10.8 million. Total budgeted expenditures are $11.2 million. General fund, the city's most important fund, that where most operating costs are paid for, budgeted revenues of $3.9 million. Budgeted expenditures of $3,779,000. The tax millages are not anticipated to change, and again, most of the taxes are raised from the operating millage, which goes directly into the general fund. The road millage and the pension millage go into the road fund and street and pension fund, respectively. No increase in the city millage rate. We are currently levying the maximum allowed millage rate under the Headley Amendment. The operating millage could be increased with vote of the people from 13.0476 mils to 15 mils. This would increase general fund property tax revenue by approximately $415,000. Interesting fact, for homeowners who have the homestead exemption on their property, 43 cents of every property tax dollar paid is retained by the city. The rest are passed on to cover county level services with St. Clair County and also school district services. So again, 43 cents of every dollar paid by homestead property owners goes to the city. Total property tax revenue this year is $3,516,230. This is below our 2007 high of about $4 million, but it is above our 2014 low of $3 million. Now, going on to the general fund, despite the uncertainty in state revenue sharing reductions, a $151,000 surplus is budgeted for in the general fund. This is a few different factors went into the creation of this surplus. First and foremost, property tax revenue is anticipated to increase roughly $76,000. The taxable value by law goes up every year. The growth is limited to inflation, but the only way that decreases is if the assessed value of a property drops below the taxable value of a property. That is not going to happen for this tax year. The assessors have already completed their board of reviews, so we see that $76,000 anticipated increase in property tax revenue is, I'm quite confident in that number. Additionally, there was a $75,000 reduction in insurance costs in the police department, and that's primarily due to two factors. One, the cops switched health insurance providers from Cops Trust to Mesa. That was about $52,000 annually that we will save on insurance costs, as well as some of the retirees who turn 65 are no longer covered by the insurance of the city, and that is happening this upcoming fiscal year as well, which saw further reductions. Also, previous budgets have included the purchase of police car. There is no car budgeted this year, which saves, again, about $24,000. And besides those large big ticket items, a lot of what I did to get the surplus was be conservative and use 3-year averages of spending in a lot of categories. I noticed that what had been budgeted was high compared to the last 3 years of activity. So you trim a little bit from certain line items. And again, the cumulative effect of that was, and the police department savings was a budgeted surplus of $150,000. Obviously, the surplus could be reduced by, if the reduction in state revenue sharing is much greater than 10%, still not which would be throughout next fiscal year, and also just depending on how our other funds perform, primarily the golf course. In case they end the year with a deficit, we'll have to transfer some money to close that deficit. I think it's always important to talk about legacy cost challenges, which are pension and retiree health care. Pension costs are anticipated to increase $52,000 annually over the next 20 years. The current system-wide impact of the police pension changes that were done in fall are not going to be known until we receive the next actuarial valuation. We typically get those in June. I haven't heard that those have been delayed yet with everything else going on. So I anticipate council is certainly going to want to look into that increase of $52,000 annually over the next 20 years. And I think that kind of discussion will be a good fit for a workshop in the future. The other legacy cost is retiree healthcare benefits. Just a few months ago, we established a trust for retiree healthcare benefits in the amount of $550,000. The current retiree insurance costs are paid for out of annual operating revenue. This is expected to be enough to continue for several years before the trust assets may be needed. So the city has made a strong progress in addressing retiree healthcare costs. And again, pension costs, we're taking action there too. The exact extent of what that is going to do to our contributions won't be known yet until we get that actuarial evaluation. Okay, now we're going to moving on to streets. This is year 4 of our road millage, so we have 6 more years left of that 10-year millage that was approved by voters. The majority of road repairs, administration is planning on them being resurfacing projects, which are like mill and fill or crush and shape, versus complete reconstruction. And essentially the justification for that is resurfacing is far less expensive than reconstruction projects. And the city has a significant number of streets that require reconstruction. There simply is not enough money to really fix the worst roads in town without some other source of additional funding. So again, that can be a topic for another time. That also, the need to do resurfacing projects, there's plenty of roads in town that we can resurface and have, visible improvements there for our residents. And with the uncertainty in gas tax revenue, we're still going to be able to plow the streets. We're still going to be able to fix the potholes. But if the less gas tax revenue we have, the less money we'll have for the big ticket reconstruction project items. So that's our street fund. I'm going to keep moving on right now. Wastewater Fund. We do have a budgeted increase for the collection system repairs and associated labor. That's evident that we need to continue to do repairs there and plan for repairs, with all the development we've had on the North Riverside sewer main and other sewer mains around town. DPW director and I are currently researching the purchase of camera equipment. Right now, we contract out all of that camera work. And I think there's definitely some long-term cost savings that could be realized if the city was to purchase its own camera equipment. It's not uncommon for cities of our size to have such equipment. That purchase is not included in this budget, though, and if we do decide to move forward in that direction, that would have to be a budget amendment later on. Now, last year, there was a 3% increase in the water rates. This budget and the fee schedule, which council will receive next week, assumes that there is going to be a 3% increase in the commodity charge or per 1,000-gallon rate in the for sewer only. Again, water rates were increased 3% last year. This 3% increase is to keep sewer commodity charge in line with water. That way, we're not having to do different percent increases in the future. We can keep them more even. And if you're using 4,000 gallons of water in a month, that 3% increase would be roughly 52 cents more per month, or on a quarterly bill, $1.50 more with that increase in the sewer rates. All right, moving on to water now. The water plant, again, it's very old. We have not had major improvements or rehabilitation in 42 years. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there. Right now, staff is preparing to receive proposals for an engineering study to really evaluate what improvements are needed at the plant and what these would cost. This is just getting off the ground now. The first preliminary meeting with the engineering firms who were invited to bid on this study occurred last week. Based on just the project list generated in-house by city staff, it's likely that these improvements are going to require borrowing. And just once all the projects are designed, the bond money is secured, this work might not actually occur during this upcoming year. It might be pushed to the following fiscal year. And again, the Water Fund has seen an improvement in its financial position of a cash balance of $4 on September 30th, 2011. And on September 30th, 2019, that cash balance was $615,000. And again, currently there is no increase in water rates. Obviously, if we move forward with treatment plant improvements that require borrowing, rate increases will be needed to cover any debt issued with that work. Moving on to the golf course and harbor. The financial position of the golf course remains uncertain. Revenues and expenditures are being monitored closely this fiscal year. Last year we ended with a deficit. This year we may be in that situation again, something we're actively monitoring. The cash position of the golf course fund is essentially on life support right now. So tell everybody you know to go golfing at the golf course, please. So besides golf, the other main enterprise activity of the city is the harbor. And the harbor's cash position has steadily improved over the last few years. And as of 9/30/2019, the cash balance in the harbor fund was $620,000. Finally, with the harbor fund, there is still the outstanding debt obligation. The outstanding debt obligation as of September 30th was $305,000. Final payment on that debt is going to be made in 2026. Finally, the equipment pool fund. Many of our vehicles and equipment are either approaching or have exceeded their typical useful life. Repair costs continue to grow every year on the leaf vacs in particular. I was planning on having more equipment, including bringing me a proposal to purchase a new vac truck this fiscal year. Staff was in the process of securing quotes and trying to get demo units to see them and test them firsthand. COVID-19 has delayed that, so I'm not sure if that purchase, assuming council is willing to move forward with it, will occur in this fiscal year or next fiscal year. But I still thought it was wise to set aside $150,000 for equipment replacement. And again, some ideas for that would be the vac hydro excavator truck and a plow truck, which would be purchased using installment purchases to pay the cost off over 4, 5, 6 years versus paying all the cash up front. And then a leaf vac or two, as those costs are significantly increasing. And I know I don't have the exact number with me. I know we've spent over $20,000 in leaf vac repairs in the last 2.5 years, which is close to the cost of a new leaf vac, depending on which model you get. Obviously, they can be much more than that.
Badger.
And with that concludes the slides. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up to questions from council. And then once council is finished, we'll have our public hearing. The public will have the opportunity to speak on the budget as well. So again, I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, and I would be happy to answer questions that anybody has.
Your Honor, Tom McCartney, I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Warren, back at the general fund slide, Oh, by the way, very nice package you sent out with the budget and explanations. It probably the easiest to understand in many years. So
Thank
my
you.
hats off to you on that. But in the general fund, you mentioned that there was a $24,000 savings by not purchasing a police car. Where does that number come from?
So capital outlay in the police department budget is the last few years has been 39,000. And when I spoke with Chief Raker, he wanted to preserve some part of that capital outlay line item just in case things come up that we don't anticipate right now. So we took 39,000 down to, let me tell you I got to flip to the right page. Give me a second. We took that down to 15,000, and that's where that savings of 24,000 came from.
So the police cars aren't purchased through the equipment pool?
Going forward, it's common that in a municipality, everything except police cars are purchased with the equipment pool. And that's pretty standard practice, and that's practice we've done a mix at the city. We've sometimes purchased with general fund money, sometimes purchased out of the equipment pool money, but it's more of an accounting thing versus anything else.
Okay. Thank you. A nice job on the budget presentation.
Thank you.
Warren, real quick, what kind of improvements are you anticipating for the wastewater plant or the water plant?
So it's quite comprehensive. Let me go to I'm anticipating a few million worth of work to do all of this. Again, I think a breakdown of the repairs that are needed is going to be best accomplished at a workshop or another meeting, in particular because this budget doesn't have any of those costs built into it yet. Well, there's a lot of work with electrical equipment and how the equipment talks to the operators who look at it on the computer screen, and it allows them to have more control from their computer over the water plant processes than having to run down from the computer into the basement and do some manual adjustments. The electrical system, there's a lot of things with that need to be upgraded. There's concerns with the HVAC system. And then there's a bunch of things regarding the filters that we use. Again, they're working just fine, but again, these are some things that need to be replaced ever so often. So this study would be looking at the current conditions and evaluating, having the engineer's opinion of what would be needed, what is not. But again, a deeper dive into those projects is best kept for another meeting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Warren, do you want to take a few minutes and talk about the 8th officer?
I can. So this budget is built with the assumption in the police department that enough funds have been set aside to allow the hiring of an 8th police officer. And the cost benefit analysis shows that it would be, the city could, the benefits do outweigh those costs. Regardless of if a 8th officer is hired or not, the bottom line requested budget for the police department, I really don't see that changing at all, because if an 8th officer is not hired, the city would then still need to set aside money for part-time wages, assuming we're able to attract and retain part-time officers, and also some of that would have to go to increased overtime, because the city every day right now, a police officer takes a contractually bargained for day off, vacation, sick time. We're paying somebody overtime to cover that shift because we don't have the manpower to cover that overtime. So again, I don't see the bottom line of the police department budget changing at all. If anything, those funds would have to just be reallocated from the wages category to either the overtime category or remain in wages in the form of part-time patrol wages.
Mr. Kinswater and I did meet with the chief, and we discussed it at some length. And after reviewing and listening to the chief, we thought there was money to be saved actually by adding another officer. by juggling things around because of availability, no one coming out of the academy and so forth.
Well, yeah, I agree with all the whole premise, and I'm just hoping that what we do with this is keep an eye on the overtime to make sure that bring on the full time does decrease all that overtime that we've been building up through the years. And I've talked to Warren about it, and he's basically assured me that that's what's going to happen. He showed me the numbers, and I believe it works. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
So is what you're saying is a cost analysis savings and save us or lose us any money by hiring an 8th officer?
I think we'll see savings in overtime, certainly. So there's savings there. And I also think there's two other parts of this cost benefits analysis, if you will. One is what is the highest and best use of city dollars? Is it in support of a part-time officer program where which last fiscal year, the city spent roughly $41,000 in part-time wages, and all of those officers who we had employed last year no longer work with the city. We have part-time officers who we pay, we schedule them 30 hours a week for 3 months to do their training period, and then sometimes the officer stays around a few months. We had one officer leave his first week on the job after his training period ended, and again, the dollars were budgeted for and the dollars were spent. What is the best use of those dollars? And I think besides the savings in overtime and the argument that the highest and best use of the spending, another factor to consider is the overtime hours worked by the police department. If you give me a pause for a second, I can grab some other data I have on this. Bear with me, please. Back in 2013, the total overtime hours worked, and this is unscheduled overtime, not holiday time, not court time, was 532 officers. I'm sorry, 532 hours of overtime. That was when we had eight officers. Over the last few years, we've gone from 8 full-time to 7 full-time, and also had a revolving door of part-time officers. That number of overtime hours has climbed from 532 to last year it was 1,500. The year before that it was 1,100. The city of St. Clair is actively spending over $100,000 a year, in some cases over $120,000 a year in overtime. That again is not holiday overtime. It's not going to court overtime. It's primarily driven by whenever somebody takes a sick day or a vacation day, in order to maintain shift coverage, we have to bring somebody in and pay them overtime. And this, the cumulative effect of all of that, again, it's gone from 532 hours of overtime to 1,100 and 1,500. And besides the dollar cost of that, that means the officers are working much more hours. I believe last year, I don't have that number in front of me at the moment, but the average officer worked over 240 hours of overtime last year. And when you think about that, that's 240 hours above what a normal employee would work. It's time away from the family. It's time on the job in a stressful profession. And I think that there's value there, and it's not a dollar benefit, but it's a moral benefit to allow to not be working people 240, 260 hours of overtime above and beyond their 80 hours they're already scheduled for.
Anybody else?
No, there was some substantial savings too by people leaving our healthcare part of the police department too that weighed into the analysis of it.
Yes, that's correct. The police department saw a $75,000 decrease in annual health insurance costs in this budget. As retirees continue to reach 65 in the coming years, that cost savings are going to further increase. Obviously, if those savings did not happen, this would be a different conversation.
And just for clarity, Warren, we're not dumping the full part-time program. If this really doesn't do what we think it's going to do, that option is still there.
That's correct, yes.
Contractually, it is, right, Bill?
Yes.
We would never want to remove that from the agreement that we have as
No.
far as part-time police officers.
So the part-time program will continue still.
I mean, that's how.
Anybody else have anything for Warren on the proposed annual budget? All right, then we're going to move to the public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing number 6 on the 2020-2021 annual budget, and we will take questions from the public at this time.
I'd like to remind those that are joining via phone to hit *9 in order to signal to the city clerk that you wish to speak.
Annette, do you have anyone in the queue?
Not yet. I'm actively monitoring the participants. I do not see any comments, Your Honor.
At this time, I'm going to close the public hearing. We'll move on to number 7. Ordinance resolution 2011, establishing a COVID-19 preparedness and response plan. Mr. Downey.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, before council tonight is a proposed resolution that addresses a mandate that the governor has placed on city governments, in fact, all businesses that are reopening contact with the public. This was a part of her executive order 2020-59, which was issued back on April the 24th. There have been subsequent reiterations of that executive order. Each one of those subsequent reiterations contains this mandate. And what you have before you is the product of a deliberation that I and the city's labor council, Ryan Fantuzzi, puzzled over for some time in order to become compliant with the governor's mandate. And there are essentially 2 ways that this preparedness plan could be authored. I'm going to begin by telling you how we chose not to do it, and then describe how we did in fact do it and how that's memorialized on the document before council. One way that this preparedness plan could have been done was to specifically articulate types of behavior that we are either encouraging or discouraging. And that might be something that could be authored by Mr. Rothy or by the mayor, by Mr. Fantuzzi or I suppose. And that might include something such as washing hands a certain amount of time during the day, or encouraging social distancing of 6 feet, which is certainly the current posture of the government. Or it might be encouraging employees to work remotely when they can. The issue that Mr. Fantuzzi and I kept coming back to there is that these recommendations are very fluid, and that if we were to actually articulate specific guidelines in the preparedness plan, there's no assurance that a week or 2 or a month or 2 from now, those same guidelines that were being encouraged by the government at this point in time are still going to be the case. Perhaps down the road, there's going to be a requirement of glove wearing as opposed to hand washing, or maybe some enhanced face masking as opposed to just a cloth cover. So what Mr. Fantuzzi and I determined was not to elect that option, but rather what you have before you. And what we have done is identified 5 primary sources of authority have come to the fore during the pandemic. Locally, that would be the St. Clair County Health Department. On a statewide basis, it would be the Department of Health and Human Services and the governor's office itself. And then on a national level, the federal government's Department of Labor, OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, and from the Department of Health and Human Services, the Center for Disease Control. And what we determined in this resolution was that the city's preparedness plan would be the articulation of whatever the current best practices are. So in other words, if this resolution would be adopted, the city would be in compliance with the governor's executive order by saying that any of these 5 entities, should they issue a declaration on social distancing, on mask wearing, on hand washing, on remote working, things of that nature, those would implicitly be adopted by the city at the time of their adoption. In other words, we would not have to come back and amend the plan as it might need to be amended from time to time, but rather we would simply take the amendments made by those various authorities as the current operating mandate for the city of St. Clair. And I know that there's been a discussion, why now, why do we need to do this? Is this something that we need to do at all? And the answer is yes, because the governor's executive order mandates this. In fact, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to pull this up on my screen. It's from paragraph 11A. Paragraph 11A of Executive Order 2020-59, which was executed back on April the 24th, requires the enactment of such a plan for a city government. And why now? The executive order, the stay-at-home order under which we're operating currently, is set to expire next Thursday. And I would anticipate upon its expiration, and I'll allow Mr. Rothy to address this specifically, but I would assume that the following day, as soon as Friday the 29th, there would be people back in the building to work or to pay bills or to pick up information on matters such as permits or what have you. And if we have this preparedness plan in place, it would simply foreshadow the opening that appears inevitable in short order. So that's why the timing. And if there are any specific questions about how Mr. Fantuzzi and I came up with this, I'd be glad to answer them now.
Mr. Downey, what if we vote this down? What happens?
Well, then we'll have to go back to the drawing board. We would not be compliant with the governor's executive order, and we would try to have something ready for council at the June 1st meeting. And I assume at that time, again, barring an extension of the stay-at-home order, City Hall would be open for business, but I would view, again, what would basically be a 48-hour lapse as really a de minimis failure to comply with the order. If we were to have something in place by Monday, June the 1st, that would certainly be appropriate in my view.
Well, what's happening with other municipalities that don't agree with the governor's ruling? I mean, staying in, but we're ready. It seems like Michigan's way behind some other counties and states and that type of thing. If we adopt this, we're locked into what she tells us, and we have to comply.
Well, barring a court order, the governor has the authority to issue these rulings. So I don't know that I would characterize the city as being locked into anything. It's simply recognizing that to the extent that these authorities are issuing best practices for businesses such as the city of St. Clair to follow, we would be adopting them.
So all over the country, local municipalities and cities are disobeying governor's orders. They're opening up their communities. They're opening up their towns. They're opening up their businesses. Why aren't we doing that? What is it about St. Clair that we're not doing that? That's the question I get every day. Why can I walk into Lumberjack or I can walk into Ace Hardware on top of 50 people or I can go to the liquor store, or I can go to the tobacco shop, but I can't go to a restaurant. I can't go to a party store. I can go to a party store, but I can't go to, why? Why is our community not just stepping up like Tallahassee, Florida, or some areas in Tennessee and Georgia?
I agree 100% with you, Tom.
I got to chime in on that. I don't, the governor's already, she's got a lot of protests against her and that type of thing. And I think she's slowly starting to pay attention to what the public wants, but I don't want to adopt something and be held hostage by it.
I mean,
Jim, I talked to you earlier on the phone. When you explain this to me, this resolution, this is for employees for the city, is that correct?
Yes, it applies to the city's employees' interactions with the public.
Okay, just a question or something that come up when I'm looking at this. We got 5 different authorities that we're going to be dealing with. What if there's a discrepancy with one of the guidelines between the county and the state or whatever? Which direction do we go?
Well, you'll note in the body of the resolution that the council, if it were to adopt this, leaves it to the superintendent. Mr. Rothy would ultimately be charged with implementing the best practices. I guess my view at this point, I think theoretically the issue you raise is possible to occur, but my study of this subject over the last several months is that there's been great pains taken to coordinate the responses among local units such as the county health department and the state, perhaps to a lesser degree the federal government. But I would hope that there would be uniformity among those authorities, and the situation that you suggest would not be a reality.
Question, what, I'm sorry.
Adopting this reduces our liability with the employees. Is that correct?
I'm not sure that that's. I haven't really given that some thought, Councilmember Kinsvater. That might be a question better directed to Mr. Fantuzzi. I think this is more geared toward assuring the members of the public that come into City Hall what practices does the City of St. Clair, what practices are its employees undertaking to ensure the safety of the public as they interact at City Hall.
Jim, number 7 says that the city superintendent by the authority granted charter shall have the power to implement and enforce policies consistent with the provisions of this resolution. So ultimately, Warren would maybe come to us, get our input, and determine what the best practices here would be.
Well, to Councilmember Kinsvater's issue, I suppose if there were a conflict, that would be that might be a point of departure. In other words, to bring council back into it. But my opinion is that if council were to adopt this resolution, it would then be up to the superintendent to make sure that whatever requirements are made for public safety are followed by city employees.
Does Mr. Ralphie need this resolution to have that ability?
He can probably do it simply as, in his management capacity as a superintendent. But because the governor has issued this requirement in her executive order, we are to give voice to those common sense approaches in a written document. And Mr. Fantuzzi and I have determined that the best way to approach it is in this broad sense to allow the authorities to set forth those terms.
I had one more question. What other municipalities around us, our neighboring ones, have such the same resolution? What are there comparables? Marysville, Marine City, are they all the same, or?
I think he froze.
Yeah, I think he froze too. I didn't mean to scare him.
Way to go, Mike. Way to go, Phil.
Annette, you there?
I'm here. He's had to log on and off a couple times, so I'll just wait for him to come back on.
Okay. Your Honor, to that point, I don't want to do something that we don't have to do or that our other neighbors aren't doing and be locked in, but
I don't want to follow the neighbors, Mike. I don't agree with the common sense approach that this resolution or her executive orders are mandating. I've got a lot to say about it, and I'm going to refrain from saying it, but I don't agree with this resolution at all.
well,
Jim, are
let's-
you with us now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think I was answering Councilmember Kuffa's question about whether Mr. Rothi could simply apply these common sense approaches on his own without the need for the resolution. And my response to that is yes, I think that he can. However, because the governor has issued this mandate as a part of her executive order, the city does need to have some document on the books. And I note, for example, today, the city of Port Huron published a document that's actually a standalone document. It has the seal of the city on the front of it. It has appendices attached to it. And it has the specific types of guidance that I talked about in the first example. Again, that is not the approach that Mr. Fantuzzi and I recommend in the resolutions before you for your consideration tonight, because I believe that there's a likelihood, if not a possibility, or not just a possibility, rather the likelihood that those best practices will change from time to time.
We just lost him again.
I'm sorry.
There he goes. He's back.
All right, I'm sorry about that. I don't think my service is too good tonight. Anyway, to finish that thought, I think that by leaving it as we have, in other words, we'll be relying on the updates given by these authorities. It makes for a less intrusive document for us to approve in order to be compliant with the governor's order.
So this resolution is basically just to abide by the governor's order?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
I think Mike Laporte had a question when you froze the first time about the
Sure.
other municipalities.
Yeah, Jim, what other municipalities around us have adopted this type of resolution? And we've got quite a few council people that I feel the same way I do. We don't always agree, and we want to keep the public safe. We want to move forward, but what happens if we just postpone it?
That's the privilege of the council. As I say, I don't know that there's anything urgent here because City Hall will not be open to the public for the foreseeable future. And I think that by the time we convene again on June 1st, we can work to address whatever issues council has and have something adopted at that time that would be compliant with the governor's executive order.
I'll make a motion to table it.
support.
All right, the motion's been made and supported to table the resolution 2011. Any questions or comments? Jim, if we table, does that mean we have to bring it back next meeting?
Well, I think, I guess, depending on how things are progressing with the governor's order, I would plan on having it back before council on June 1st, because certainly if City Hall is open at that time, in order to be compliant with the governor's order, we want to have a preparedness plan in place.
Any other questions? Anything from the public?
Your Honor, I'll say one thing on this real quick. Regardless of council action on the resolution, my responsibility is to ensure the safety of the city employees and the citizen at large, with a particular focus, of course, on the city employee. And as such, regardless of the outcome on this resolution, there's going to have to be a reopening plan, which lays out how to ensure that the employee and the public they interact with is kept safe. And of course, yes, it will follow guidelines that are issued by the health department and other agencies. This is the world we live in. Every community is going to take the reopening process and have their administrative reopening plan. They'll all look a little different. It's something I'm very confident that I'm going to be able to successfully implement here. So again, regardless of your feelings on the resolution, know that as a city superintendent, my responsibility is to promote employee safety, and that's exactly what I am going to be doing in the coming days and months as we plan to reopen to the public.
Anybody else?
Tom, did you have anything you wanted to comment? You were,
No, I said everything I wanted to say.
all right.
All right, so the motion's been made to table. Call a roll, please.
Support,
Yes.
McCartney,
Yeah.
Watt,
He's muted.
You gave a thumbs up.
Go ahead.
You
Watt,
can hear me now.
Yes.
Kinswater,
Yes.
Kufa,
Yes.
Cedar,
Yes,
carried, Your Honor.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Downey. Mr. Rothy? Well, number 8, City Superintendent. Mr. Rothy, what do you got tonight?
Yes, many things to report on. First, the deficit elimination plan that was done by council a meeting or two ago was approved by Department of Treasury. Last week, city staff conducted interview for a bridge tender position. An offer was made and accepted. Anticipate that person will begin this week. Again, we'll hold off on identity until all the final paperwork has been signed. But that's major activity of my time last week. Additionally, the fee schedule, which is typically adopted alongside the appropriations resolution, is undergoing some minor cosmetic changes. There's a few small fee tweaks and a planned large revision to the way we do fees for planning and zoning approval processes. Expect more information on that at the next council meeting, so that the budget and the fee schedule can be adopted simultaneously. Moving on to public works related functions, over the last few weeks, the city water hydrants were flushed. This is an important way of doing an annual exercise routine to the water main distribution system. City staff conducted that. The parking lot projects for City Hall parking lot and the Pine Street parking lot by Murphy Inn, those are anticipated to move forward in the next 2 to 3 weeks, essentially waiting on the asphalt plants to reopen. And so expect work on that. The 2020 street project bid is expected to be awarded at the June 15th council meeting. Sealed bids are due to AEW on June 4th. City staff is also about to seek sealed bids for the St. Clair Highway paving project, which we talked about earlier in the year. Additionally, the North Riverside Sewer, AEW has had a chance to review the footage and initially proposed installing 2,500 feet or about half a mile of sewer lining, and then do spot excavation repairs to 8 sections of the sewer main. Given just the age of the main, the location of the main, we've gone back to AEW to request that they look more into potentially relocating parts, if not all, of that sewer main, and AEW is going to have the survey crews out to start doing that work in the near future. So again, everything is working now with the sewer main, but the long-term repairs and in order to bring stability to that sewer main are still being considered. Additionally, there was a power loss at the water plant about a week and a half ago. It did lead to, in the transition from generator power to regular power, the fuse blew and there was some flooding in the water plant basement. That caused some equipment damage. I've submitted a claim to the city's insurance provider, who is going to cover any work above the deductible on that. And then lastly, regarding city recreation programs, I have a few announcements today. Let me get my paper. The community outdoor pool will be closed this summer. The youth activities program that happens, it's a 6-week program put on by the recreation department. That is will not be offered this summer. All city-sponsored program and events scheduled for June will not be offered. Again, that's June as of now. And then any other city-sponsored recreation programs are suspended until further notice. Our rec director is working with others in the county and the community to figure out a way we could perhaps do some sort of virtual programming for everybody during this time. And, the decision to close the pool really came from the bottom up. It was the suggestion to close the pool was brought to administration by the people who work at the pools, our aquatics director, Sue Daniels, and out of, just safety concerns for, the employees in the community at large, we thought it was best to close the pool for this season. And with that, that concludes my report.
Any questions from Mr. Rothy? Let's go to B. Mr. Downey, do you have anything else?
Your Honor, I just, I guess, amplify one of the observations I made, and that is that the governor's current stay-at-home order is set to expire on its face a week from Thursday on May 28th. So absent an extension of that order, I would anticipate that we would be meeting in City Hall at the time of the next regular meeting, June 1st, with the social distancing and face covering requirements that have been made a part of the gradual reopening to date.
All right. And if the stay-at-home order is extended, then we're back like this?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify here. So regardless of what happens with the stay-at-home order, the order to have virtual meetings actually is good through June 30th. So another 6 weeks or so. Ultimately, I think the decision on where to have meetings and whether it's on Zoom, inside, outside, I think that's ultimately should be a council discussion and a council decision. I know the mayor was planning on bringing that up today under mayor and council member comments, so perhaps it's best to save that this conversation to that time.
Anything else, Jim?
I have nothing else, Your Honor.
All right. Go to C, city departments. Anybody have anything?
Nothing.
All right. D is authorities, boards, and commissions. Anything happening out there? All right. Number 9, we have no unfinished business. We have no new business. Claims and accounts, May 7, May 14, 2020.
Yes, Your Honor. Hearing no questions on it, I would note on the draw from the 5/14/2020, there's a note from the accountant that there's going to be a direct payment made that you'll see. You won't see any documentation on it. That's just a change. There'll be a direct pay document. So you'll notice that on the draw. That'll be an annual thing. It shouldn't change too much.
What is it?
It's your retirement, your MERS payment.
Oh, okay.
All right. I should probably start there. Made it a lot easier.
All right.
I make a motion to approve as presented, Your Honor.
All right. Any questions? Call the roll, please.
McCartney?
Yes.
Watt?
Yes.
Kinsfater?
Yes.
Hoopa?
Yes.
Laporte?
Yes.
Cedar?
Yes.
Carried, Your Honor.
Thank you. We'll go to number 12. Is there any public comment out there tonight?
As a reminder to the public, you can raise your hand if you're on your computer or a mobile device, or if you're calling in, *9, and it will indicate that you wish to speak. I see no comments, Your Honor.
All right. We'll move to number 13 then, mayor and council announcements or comments. I would like to take this opportunity to make sure everyone has a safe Memorial Day. Try to remember what Memorial Day is about. I know it's going to be very different for this year for everyone. Does anyone else on council have any feeling that they need more time going through the budget? Are you pretty comfortable with what happened tonight?
I am.
All right, I'm seeing a lot of this.
It's all good.
All right, then I'm not going to schedule a work session for the next meeting, because if we did, it would be budget driven. and speak of the next meeting, if the work or the stay-at-home order is still in effect, obviously, I guess we'll do June, the first June meeting here. But if that has been rescinded, then we'll be in chambers. Mr. Downey, does that sound legit?
Yes, well, I want to amplify a point that Mr. Rothy made, and that is that the governor has extended the waiver on the Open Meetings Act. And I don't recall now the executive order from which that emanates, but City Council is allowed to conduct these Zoom remote meetings through the end of June. So, and I guess that extension was put in place because some communities, even though the stay-at-home order might expire, might prefer to meet remotely out of an abundance of caution. So yes, that remains an option to City Council, regardless of whether the stay-at-home order expires on May 28th or not. But if the stay-at-home order does expire on May 28th, then there would be nothing, in my view, preventing council from meeting in chambers on Monday, June 1st.
What if she does this, Jim? On May 28th, she says the stay-at-home order is rescinded with some exceptions. You can meet in groups smaller than 10. You got to have masks, you got 6 feet apart. Can we have a public meeting downstairs? And how do we limit it to 10 when there's 7 or 8 of us already right here?
There might have to be some thought given that as to perhaps how administration proceeds there. I don't know the answer to that as I sit here.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
So that's something I'm sorry.
No, I just, you talked about a workshop. Is it time that we look at a charter amendment in regards to what Mr. Rothy brought up about our budget and maybe changing that and extending it to?
What I was kind of hoping, Tom, was that when we get this stay-at-home order stuff kind of changed, I'm hoping that when we get back into chambers, we can do that. Because, I mean, this is all right, but I'm like everybody else. I prefer we're downstairs face-to-face, and maybe if that would be a better way to work through that kind of stuff rather than this format. It's just my thought.
Yeah, just as long as it doesn't get lost, I think it would help city management out a lot.
Trust me, it won't get lost.
All right. I guess that's all I had. Anybody have anything?
Hearing nothing else, Your Honor, I'd make a motion to adjourn.
All right. The motion made and supported to adjourn. Can we call the roll, please?
Scott,
Yes.
Kinswater,
Yes.
Kufa,
Yes.
Laporte,
Yes.
McCartney,
Yes.
Cedar.
Yes.
Carried, Your Honor.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Be safe.